Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode with Reality You and You Foundation. Today, we have with us a very special speaker, Nava Silton. Nava is a clinical psychologist and an author and a professor of psychology at the Marymount Manhattan College. Now, I've gone through your website and you have some interesting material to share with us, your musical, your books. I'm really waiting to open up this conversation to our users. Navya, can you give us a little more introduction about yourself?
Sure. So I am a developmental psychologist. I work both in the school environment and a mental health team, and I'm starting an autism program at that school. And I also work at the university at Marymount Manhattan. And in addition, I also do quite a bit of creative work in order to extend psychological information and other forms of information to the masses. I have created a comic book series that teaches about disabilities and empathy and kindness. I also have a comic book series that deals with mental health disorders so that kids can really understand these things in a really positive, strengths-based, and appealing way. I also created a musical based off of the first comic book series that's now being prepped for TV. I've also created a few other TV shows, screenplays, board games for kids, all different access points to better understand psychology, development, and the human mind and how we work.
And that
So,
such there's so much of different work, all clubbed into one individual. I wish someday we can see your musical in India here. I think through COVID, what we've seen is children go through a lot of anxiety. There are, I've seen a rise in autism. And I'm going
yeah.
to come to that. So if we can just start off with, just explaining to the viewers about the autism spectrum,
Yeah.
what it is, how would you identify people with autism?
Yeah, so autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's usually the hallmark deficit is a social cognition deficit, issues with socialization and communication, really missing those kinds of nuances of conversation, the sarcasm. It's a very heterogeneous disorder. There's a very large spectrum. So there are some individuals on the spectrum who are verbal, but they are missing those social nuances of conversation, the sarcasm, the humor, those types of things. They might have a monologue conversation and not recognize that others around them are bored by what they're chatting about. They might not have that to and fro of conversation, that discourse back and forth. And then you have kids on the spectrum who are nonverbal and they need to rely on communication devices and other types of things to communicate to others, or sign language. So there's really a very large spectrum. It's very, very heterogeneous, but all individuals on the spectrum usually have some kind of social and communication deficit, and there are often repetitive and obsessive behaviors that also accompany an autism diagnosis as well.
So just for the viewers, you're saying these are social and communication difficulties. We are also saying here that the IQ of the child is normal.
So there can be a real, just like there's a spectrum, in terms of verbal and nonverbal ability. The same with IQ. You can have kids who on the spectrum who are very high on IQ, and you can have those who have lower levels of IQ. So it can really vary on the spectrum.
Okay. And how early can, a user or one of our audience, how early can they detect whether their children have autistic abilities or communication difficulties? Because often enough, some children are very introverted, some are shy. Through COVID, we've seen a lot of shuffling happening around schools, children taking time to open up. In India, we were shut down for 2 years. So we are seeing a lot of social anxiety among children. How would you differentiate that from autistic features?
Yeah, there's some kind of key things you're going to be looking for, right? So there's that whole notion of joint attention. So if we're playing ball and I'm tossing a ball back and forth to you, right? You're going to be looking between my eyes and the ball, my eyes and the ball to make sure you know when it's coming and what my intention is. Someone who struggles with joint attention might be just focused on the ball, but is not taking that time to look at your eyes, to read the kind of decode your facial expression. So joint attention, a lot of kids on the spectrum might not have joint attention as early as it's a young kind of skill set to have. So that might be something to look at. Eye gaze, and are they able to hone in on your emotions and understand them and respond, appropriately to them. So that could be something. Mind blindness is something that's often associated with autism, where it suggests that individuals on the spectrum might have a hard time taking the perspective of somebody else.
Right.
So not necessarily understanding your pain, or when you're, are experiencing different emotions. So autism is typically diagnosed in the first 2 years of life, arguably as early in some places as 6 months. But usually later, once you start to really see that discrepancy with the other kids, right? So around 12 months of age, we're speaking. Around 18 months of age, we're really starting to amp up our
Yeah.
language ability.
Yeah.
And so 18 months is a very, very common time where you'll see autism diagnoses, because you can really start to see where their peers are compared to where they are. And often with autism, there is either a lack of presence of speech or delayed speech or speech that changes. So a lot of different things. Again, it's so heterogeneous, so it can look so different. But in those first 2 years of life are is the most common time frame. And sometimes it is caught later. But that's typically when it tends to manifest.
And I think that is what would happen, in different cultures, right? So I think in India, we do tend to sort of detect it much later. So, if the child is, grade 3, grade 4, when there are complaints from school, teachers have identified that the child may have social and communication difficulties. I think that's when the child is sent for testing.
Yeah.
Coming to, the spectrum and coming to test associated with the spectrum, can you give our users some information on that?
Yeah, one thing I always say is keep track of the milestones, but don't live by them, right? Because kids just in general are different. They have varied time frames in which they develop. But what I always say to parents is really be thoughtful about that 12 months to 18-month time frame. There's a whole lot of really rich development that happens during that time frame. And if you are not seeing your kid reach those milestones and they seem delayed in physical development, cognitive development, socio-emotional development, make sure to get those evaluators in, have those evaluations, those assessments done to determine whether or not you might benefit from speech therapy,
Yeah.
from physical therapy, from special instruction, from occupational therapy. It never hurts to evaluate kids early. And they might say, what, let's come back in 6 months and see, how things progress from here to then, and then make a decision in terms of if they need extra support. But I always say intervene as early as you can, because you'll be able to set that kid up for, the best possible outcome if you intervene early. There are a number of assessments that are given at the toddler age, at the preschool age, at the elementary school age, to assess for things like autism and social communication types of disorders. So just being on target again with those assessments is really important.
And would you say this is, what are the causes of somebody being detected with autism? What would be some of the most common causes that you've seen around?
So one of the reasons that autism is represented by a puzzle piece is because there is so much that is still unknown about it, right? So there's definitely a strong genetic component. There's no question there's a strong genetic component. There have been genes that have been looked at. There have been distinctions in brain size and brain growth that have been discussed. There are differences in places like the fusiform face area, which helps decode facial expression in the brain. So they've looked at a lot of different things to discriminate the, brain with autism and the typical brain. But in terms of the causality, a lot is still unknown. So again, I always say it's most likely a strong genetic predisposition coupled with environmental toxins, right? That, may have been relevant during pregnancy, may be relevant, a bit thereafter, but so many theories have come out about autism, and some people don't even see it as one disorder. Some people see it as a bunch of different disorders, and that's why they believe it's so heterogeneous. So a lot of different theories out there. There's actually also a theory called the extreme male brain theory of autism, or extreme right male brain theory of autism, by Simon Baron Cohen. And what he suggests is that why is it that boys might be 4 times more likely to have autism than girls? Because they have kind of that extreme male right brain. Those on the spectrum have that kind of extreme male right brain where they have those systematic and mechanistic abilities, really maybe good with computers, with mathematical operations, those kinds of things, but struggle with the more female the female
Right.
emotional brain side, right? That side that deals with emotionality and socialization and those types of things. So tons of theories are out there, and we're just trying to really make sense of how to use all these theories to best accommodate our friends on the spectrum.
So you're saying somebody is probably born autistic, and of course, the environment will sort of enhance the symptoms depending on whether the environment is not helping the child.
That is my gut. My gut is that there really is that strong genetic predisposition. And then, the environment kind of brings things out. It helps things manifest. But that's my gut. I'm not a believer in the MMR vaccination causing autism. The amount of mercury that was in that vaccination that people were so concerned about, the half-life of it, according to many, was not enough to cause something of this sort. It wasn't neurotoxic enough to cause something of this sort. But I do believe that we need to be thoughtful about what we do, and when, if we do have a thought that our kid might be struggling with certain developmental issues, again, getting that early intervention ASAP, right away.
And a lot of children, autistic children, do go to normal schools, right? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, to regular schools. How do you think a parent needs to cope with that?
I think that, yes, a lot of kids on the spectrum, especially those who are verbal and who are, able to communicate a little bit more easily with their peers, are mainstreamed and integrated in schools.
Yep.
Those who are nonverbal and who may require more support can often be in more self-contained classrooms.
Right.
But I think, part of the reason that I created my children's comic book series called Real Abilities is because I wanted parents to feel like they could send their children to mainstream schools, and those kids, those typically developing kids, would really embrace their children. They would welcome them, they would embrace them, they would understand the disorder a little bit more.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at that individual as other, as their kid on the spectrum as other and different, they would see the beautiful strengths and the passions and the interests of that child as opposed to just othering them. And that was the real basis behind creating my comic book series. And I think information is power. I think sometimes kids are very fearful when they don't understand something. And so they can bully, or they can put people down, or, ignore them. But I think with the Real Abilities comic book series, or the Aggie Nuno musical, or different types of things that are out there that can offer that information, you take away that fear when you have that information. And I think that allows kids to feel more comfortable in these mainstream environments.
And I think that's such a beautiful concept of, your book series.
Yeah.
Just having them, listening to them, going through them. I think you're also integrating and creating an inclusive environment for children, because it's really difficult for them to cope with their peers, right?
Yeah. And, I think what I always say is, you know, yes, kids on the spectrum struggle with that socialization, the communication, the repetitive and obsessive behaviors. Yes, these characteristics are difficult, but they have incredible strengths, incredible passions, incredible interests that other kids would find fascinating and amazing. And so if we could, kind of um, arm these typically developing kids with this information about all these cool things, about this child as opposed to just the challenge, I think kids would really embrace it more, welcome these children more, and create more really strong and rich peer relationships.
I'm going to, speak about positive psychology because I think when we talk about psychology, we keep talking about the deficits in a person and the damages and the disorders. But I
Yeah,
think this is a fantastic way of saying that, yes, these children have certain strengths. So can you highlight some of the strengths for us? Because I think
absolutely.
children are sort of isolated, bullied, and it's very, very difficult for them to cope.
Absolutely. So individuals on the spectrum, again, there is heterogeneity, there is a spectrum, every kid's a little bit different, but you'll often see a lot of kind of superior perceptual abilities,
Wow.
visual-spatial abilities, often, not always, but sometimes some extra ability in mathematics, mechanistic, systematic skills, computerized skills, those kinds of things. You'll sometimes see a special relationship with animals. I don't know, who's familiar with Temple Grandin. I think everyone is at this point. She's unbelievable. And because of her ability to think, think in pictures, she was able to develop all these incredible facilities to really be humane and sensitive to animals across the world. So she is not only known for speaking about autism and an unbelievable speaker, but she is known across the, animal husbandry and the animal science world for her incredible achievements. So not just Temple, a lot of interesting research has come out about the special connection that individuals on the spectrum might have to different types of animals. And that's why things like hippotherapy, horse therapy, those kinds of things, dolphin and different types of therapies like that often are great for kids on the spectrum because of their ability to really connect with these animals.
So you're in effect, we are saying that, maybe socialization with human beings may be difficult, but with animals, they do emote, they do express, and they have a very special connection. Wow.
Right. And, if you think about it, animals don't judge us, right?
Yeah.
There's no judgment there. They're really, they are able to do unbelievable things to protect themselves, to live in the world and survive in the world in really unique ways. But similar, I'm not comparing individuals on the spectrum to animals by any means, but there's that kind of purity and lack of judgment there. And I think that's part of the amazing connection that you don't need to rely on socialization and verbal skills with animals, right? You can connect to them without those, verbal initiations and responses. So I think they have this really incredible connection, which can be really special.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I think that's a huge ray of hope for all our users. That it is, you don't have to get overwhelmed if your child is diagnosed with autism. He can go to a normal school, you can have and you can teach people things. They have their strengths, and of course, like she's saying, they can connect to animals. I just want to dive into the issue of bullying. You have given us an entire book series and a play. uh, Hopefully, we're going to see it soon on Netflix. Are we going to see it soon on television?
Well, it's the Jim Henson Company is working now on the TV show version, and we might have a film version
Wow.
as well. So there's some stuff in the works, so we'll see. And if so, I'll send it right over to you for sure.
So I just want to dive in because what I've seen in India, at least with kids, I think the concept, of bullying has become extremely overwhelming, uh, and disturbing to the extent that we've seen very high rates of anxiety, depression among, kids, right from the grade 4, 5, and upwards. Of course, it's very, very highlighted with teenagers and adolescents. How do you think we can teach children how to cope, how to accept differences in each other?
I think a big part is when kids feel good about themselves and they have a strong sense of self, I think they're less likely to bully. We find that people who bully either tend to be bullied or they tend to be people who feel the need to put other people down in
Yeah.
order to feel higher up. And, that short-term gain of, being able to look down at somebody else, really is not sustainable. And so in order to prevent bullying from happening, I think we need to keep kids with a strong sense of self. I think we need to teach empathy and have them understand how comments can really make other people feel, how they would make you feel if somebody said them to you. I think things like journaling and role playing and reading books like Real Abilities, reading books about the other, whether it's autobiographies of others, that either struggle or have different, different life stories. I think understanding the world from someone else's vantage point is a really great way towards starting to prevent bullying from happening in the first place. I also think that schools need to have a, like no tolerance policy for bullying. I think there should be a series of events that happen if bullying happens. But I think that schools should not allow it to happen, because if you allow just small things to happen, larger things will unfortunately also unfold. So I think parents and teachers and administrators need to really bond together. They need to have a strong front and really have this zero tolerance bullying policy. They need to have a strong kind of module, that they follow. And those are different ways to try to intervene. But again, prevention is really making kids feel good about themselves, making them recognize their own strengths and the strengths of others, and empathize and see that people come into the world from all different, areas, but they all deserve to be appreciated and valued.
But Nava, what I've seen last 3-4 years post COVID is, like you said, of course we need to teach empathy and taking perspective. But apart from the regular bullying that is happening in schools, there's a lot of bullying on social media. Hate messages put on stories, shared with other people who can watch your stories, which may be hundreds of followers that you have, and disastrous effects of these.
Yeah. I think when it comes to cyberbullying, of course, there are the other forms of bullying, right? There's, verbal bullying, there's social bullying, there's physical bullying, but then there's also cyberbullying, right? And cyberbullying can be particularly damaging, because it's persistent, right? A lot of these kids have devices, and they're on their devices when they're not at school. They're on their devices 24/7.
Yep.
So there's a constant feed coming in that can be problematic. There's also permanence. Things that are posted online can stay online. Someone can screenshot something you say and they can use it against you forever, right? And also because it's hard to notice. Not all parents or not all teachers and administrators are fully aware of what's happening in the cyber universe type thing. So because of that persistence, that permanence, and that hard to notice, cyberbullying can be particularly difficult. And so what we need to do is, the minute we have a sense cyberbullying might be happening, we need to stop it in its tracks. We might need to take screenshots to, get it to the right people
Yep.
to show them what's happening. And we really need to serve as a support system for our children, so they
And
know
when
that we are not against them, but with them.
Right. So when you're talking about zero tolerance policy, what are we emphasizing? What are the strict boundaries that today's schools need to establish? Because I think some of these issues are coming up to school even now. We may not have very strict protocols intact right now in some schools. So when we are talking about zero tolerance, what are the things that schools can do?
So, what I started to do in one of the schools that I work at is, when there is any kind of incident, bullying incident, the first thing that they do is they fill out a form. They say, I am really sorry, so and so, that I did this to you. I could imagine it made you feel like this. So you get that empathy piece in there. So they have to take the perspective of the other person, why it might have felt that way. And then they go in and there's a whole worksheet that they fill out. But ultimately, they start off by apologizing, by saying how it must have made that other person feel, and what they're going to do differently, how they're going to conduct themselves differently in the future. And I have found that that one sheet is a great start. after an incident happens, because you really want to approach it and address the situation immediately. You don't want to wait 2 days later and say, remember when you did that. You want to ensure it's right afterwards. You also want to ensure you get to hear both sides of the story, right? Because, one person's side, of course, has, is their own perspective, and there's usually another perspective. So I think getting both perspectives of the individuals, filling out that kind of worksheet to really help them understand how this might have made the other people feel, can be incredibly helpful. And then you have a series of repercussions that the school comes up with before these things happen. So they have a protocol in place. So perhaps if it's one offense, it's a smaller, repercussion. And if 3 happens, then it's a much larger repercussion. So, so they have a second and third chance potentially. But the first could be, in an hour off a really fun activity, gym time or recess time or something like that. A second line could be suspension for the day. A third time could be, removal from the school. I mean, you need to, again, different schools have different policies, different ideas about it. There are also different types of bullying. And so some schools, when it comes to physical bullying, they're more serious about it than if it's something with teasing or words. But as a school, the best thing you can do is set up this protocol at the very beginning of the year. Make sure all the teachers and the parents and the children know what that policy is, so that everyone has has an investment and buy into that policy, and then it's much more likely to be followed. And those are the things that can be really helpful. One other thing I would just say is the power of the bystander, right? So they're usually in a bullying incident, there's a bystander or a number of bystanders that are there. And so I often say, instead of being a bystander, if it's safe, try to be an upstander, right? So instead of just hanging around, try to be someone who stands up to the bully, who doesn't just cheer on the bully and go along with everyone else, but really stands up for the victim. So again, that is something that the whole school can get behind as well. So again, it has to be safe in order to become that upstander. It has to be a safe situation. But those are a few things for schools to keep in mind as they're working out their bullying policy and protocols.
Wow, that's good. But do you think, like you said, writing it down, having this reflection, but a written reflection, because you're rehearsing it in your mind while you're writing it. So I like that. So writing it down,
Yeah.
seeing it via plays, do you think these forms of depicting emotions and situations are more helpful than just displaying a presentation?
Oh, yeah. I think the more hands-on, the better,
Yeah.
right? When kids are writing, when they're doing role plays, when what I'll sometimes do in schools is tell every child that they are a kindness ambassador. They are an ambassador for kindness in their school, which means they're not only trying to promote kindness, but they're recognizing when there isn't kindness, and they're trying all the more so to promote it in those situations. So I think, promoting friendship circles, there's some people who have buddy benches,
Yeah.
to prevent exclusion. When some kids are left out, there's a buddy bench that they can sit on and another kid will come join them. So whether it's buddy benches or role playing or reading books to better understand the other, working through a worksheet of that sort, role plays, as I mentioned before, those are all ways to really make it tangible for kids as opposed to just watching a presentation.
Yeah. So when we're talking about kindness, empathy, compassion, right? How do we teach these skills to children? Of course, you are getting into production. You're doing a lot of work depicting it to us on television. So how do you think visually, as a parent, somebody can teach these skills at home? Because I think a lot of harshness is coming from situations that people are going through, or you said he's been bullied, and may have become harsh in that journey. So what are certain, tips that parents can use at home?
So I would use everything around you, right? I'm a big fan of that. So sometimes I have 7 children of my own. Sometimes I'll curl up with my kids as they're watching something. People always say, do you allow your kids to watch TV? Do you allow your kids to, pursue those different media interests. And my big thing is, as long as you're being mindful of the content and the dosage of how much they're watching and what they're watching, then it's fine. I give them a very distinct amount that they can watch for the entire night. And they really are really good about that. But what I'll often do is I'll curl up with them and I'll watch a show with them. And I'll say, how do you think Mary felt when Joshua took her doll? How do you think Joshua felt when Mary took his ball? So you can use the television programming that your kids are already finding appealing, and you can start to teach empathy, kindness. Oh, what could Josh have done instead there to make Mary feel even happier? So you can use what they're already viewing and finding, appealing to teach kindness, to teach empathy. The same thing with reading books with your children, right? You can pause the book and say, oh, how do you think she feels right now? What would make her feel better? What would make her feel worse? Right? Really teaching feelings, emotions, thoughts, all those things through different forms of media, whether it's books, comic books, television series that you're watching. And again, I'm a big fan of doing role plays with your kids when they're not in that actual situation. So, okay, you told me, 2 days ago that, Michael was bothering you in school. Let's play that out. You be Michael and I'll be you, or you be you and I'll be Michael, and give them a toolkit to work with if they're in this situation again, or if they're in similar situations again. And those are ways to really promote empathy, kindness, working through challenges. And I like to always say, catch your kid doing something kind. When you see your child doing something kind,
Point.
notice it, talk about it, say, I love how you just helped her, stand up from her sitting position. I have two 9-month-old twins. And I
Okay.
always will comment when my older girls will help them stand up or help them with feed them or whatever it might be. So catch them doing something kind. And if you find them doing something unkind, you can say to them, I didn't love how you handled that. How could you handle that better next time? So use all of these real life organic experiences and teach through those experiences.
Nava, you did talk about a toolkit, right? I think doing role plays with your children instead of just having a conversation with them would be more effective. That's very interesting. Reading books and watching shows together, but sometimes with adolescents, between 13 to the 17, they
Yeah,
are going through struggles of their own, teasing and body image and eating
yeah.
disorders. And you're a psychologist, so you know it all. It gets really difficult because they are in their dark space. They seek validation. They feel isolated. They want to sort of give their own identity out to the world, and they're finding that very, very overwhelming and stressful. How do you think, because most often I hear parents screaming, shouting, fighting with the adolescent children. There are so many cases where they say, we don't want to talk to our mother, we don't want to listen to her discipline. How does one navigate as a parent?
I think it's a nice balance between giving your adolescent space and respecting their boundaries as much as you want them to respect your boundaries. But also, again, and you alluded to this yourself, a lot of them are highly self-conscious. They're, self-conscious about their body image, they're self-conscious, they're anxious, they might be feeling depressed. There's a lot of emotions swirling around, a lot of hormones and a lot of emotions, that Sturm and Drang of adolescence that we see. So making them feel good about themselves. One thing that I recommend is seeing what they enjoy. Maybe they love going out for Starbucks, or maybe they love going out for ice cream, or maybe they love going to Barnes and Noble and picking out a book or whatever it might be. But trying to not only just purchase things for them, but take opportunities to, go on your own to Starbucks with them, to grab a Starbucks, grab an ice cream, give them their own individual time. I know it's hard. I have 7 kids. It's very hard to find individual time with each of your children, but you can find it. You can find those pockets of time where you can take that child out, make them feel special. And if they have certain passions and interests in certain areas, then pursue that passion with them. So if they're very interested in cartooning, buy them a cartooning book when you're at, a local bookstore. show them that you care about their passions, you care about what they're interested in. And those types of things can go a really long way for their self-esteem and for their bond with you as a parent. I also just want to mention, because we discussed kindness, I actually created a kindness game. It's called One of a Kind, Play It Forward, and it teaches kindness and socio-emotional skills. And people told me, a whole bunch of schools have bought it, but people also told me they play it every single weekend with their children.
Wow.
So basically, in order to win the game, you, along with 5 other explorers, depending on how many people you play with, try to answer kindness thought and kindness action questions in order to get to the ultimate treasure chest. You have to
Wow.
beat out a pirate to do it. The pirate's over here.
Yeah.
So the idea is, whether it's through comics or through stuff they watch, or through role plays, or for tabletop board games, whatever it is, take whatever types of materials you can to try to reinforce these important concepts with your children.
So I think that's when you can have that rapport with your child, when you're, yourself not too much with your stress and bogged down with your lifestyle. One of your videos on your website, with a TV channel, you spoke about different parenting styles.
Yeah.
And so we know that you have the authoritative parenting style. I think you spoke about the snowplow parenting. So can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I'm all into child development, parenting, you name it. So snowplow parenting is really interesting. A snowplow parent, you can picture an actual snowplow, tries to remove the snow, right? So that you can get through. And a snowplow parent, in the same way, is trying to remove all the possible obstacles from their child so that children can just kind of roll along and not have to deal with any obstacles or challenges on their own. And that sounds lovely, right? Sounds like a nice, easy life for a child, but that does not give them the trials and tribulations that they need in order to know how to deal with life. So those obstacles, those challenges that kids, encounter, are really important for them to learn how to deal with life and life situations. So parents who continue to, take away the roadblocks and, snowplow a path for them, they're actually doing a disservice for their child, because their child needs to learn those obstacles and those challenges for later life and later harder situations. The helicopter parent, right, is another type of parent that you'll hear about in the literature. And similar to a helicopter that hovers, over a location, a helicopter parent hovers over their children. They might be watching their children very, very closely, but they are not removing obstacles for them. They're just kind of more really keeping a close eye on their child, as opposed to being a full snowplow parent where you're literally removing obstacles for them.
So which one it would be better?
I think, the helicopter parent is less obtrusive in a way, less intrusive, I should say. Both I don't recommend, right? I think it's really important to know where your children are at all times, and to keep them safe and healthy and comfortable. Absolutely. But I think it's really important for kids to know that you have faith in them, to be independent, especially as they get older. Obviously, the younger the child, the more, kind of enmeshment they might need, the more dependence on you they'll have. But as they get older, they want to know you have faith in them. They want to know you have faith in them making good decisions. And so I would focus more on good decision making with your children and making sure they know how to make good decisions, as opposed to always hovering over them or trying to, kind of remove all obstacles from them. I'm a big fan of grit, right? That effortful perseverance. And no matter what obstacle comes your way, you keep going for it. You keep trying to attain those goals. And I think by being a snowplow parent, you're really preventing a kid from having that grit, from having that effortful perseverance, because they're just going to assume someone's going to take the obstacles away for them.
So my question here is, because nowadays we are seeing a lot of depression and anxiety, and I would say suicide as well among kids. I think parents are a little scared So if your child is saying, oh, I feel depressed and I'm feeling low, like you said, they are sort of letting go, relieving all the obstacles and trying to do best to pamper their kids. What would be a thin line, or what would be a fine line from them? How do they draw the line from not being too harsh on their kids, being supportive, and not, giving it the easy way?
Yeah. I think, we know that a lot of people are prone to anxiety and depression, especially in those adolescent years. It's such a rough time. We also know with COVID and the aftermath of COVID, there's been a whole lot of mental health issues that kids are encountering. I think that parents need to be there as a support. They need to, offer therapy, offer a therapist to their child and potentially medication if that's what their child needs. If it is depression and a substantial form of anxiety, and medication and therapy is what the kid needs. So I definitely don't recommend being a permissive or a neglectful parent. I definitely think you should be on course with your child, be very thoughtful about what your child needs and offer them that toolkit that they'll need. But I also don't think you should be in their face 24/7 on top of them, not trusting them, at all times. So it's achieving that balance of being that support system, giving them the tools they need, being there as having an open, line of communication and dialogue with them, so they feel they can always trust you and go to you if they need anything. But you don't want to be that person that's, checking their phone every 5 seconds and being on top of them in this helicopter or snowplow parenting fashion.
And now we have apps to check where your child is at all times and what your child is doing.
Right. Now you have all the GPS things, you have different, things that can be put on their phones for social, what they watch and what they don't watch. I mean, there's so many apps for so many things now. So that definitely can help parents out, I would imagine.
And so when like you said, you spoke about trust. And I think as your child is growing up, as you are growing up with your child, you sort of give them the autonomy. But while you give them the autonomy, I also see, at times, children are getting influence, or the trust is broken. How does one ensure adequate amount of trust and communication, like you said? Because a lot of times, as the child is becoming a teenager, the breakdown of communication or trust, and anything that the parent is saying, the child perceives it as controlling and interfering, and a lack of autonomy. So how do you think parents can ensure that they can tell and communicate to their children that they trust them?
I think those visits that, Starbucks date or the ice cream date or, whatever it might be that might be appealing for that kid, even going out to buy them, new music that they're interested in or whatever it might be, something that really follows their line of interest and passion. I think that's one way to show that you individually care about this individual child. I think that says a lot to this child that you're taking time out of your day from all the other kids and all the other responsibilities to spend time with this child. I also like to sometimes have a place in the home that is dedicated to just, we need to talk something through. This is a place for you to feel calm and comfortable and a place where we can just open up and have a dialogue. And it doesn't feel rushed. The parent is not on his or her phone. The child is not on his or her phone. They just have that kind of connection. So I think whenever you can build in those bonds with your child, that helps to build the trust. That helps to build the honesty and keep that open line of communication as open as possible.
And what if, sometimes we see there is a huge conflict in belief systems. We've seen the world changing, we've seen LGBT issues coming up, transgender issues coming up. So we see a difference of opinion with various things. How does one navigate if you do not agree with your child? You may not believe in it, you may not agree in it, you may be religious in your or your conditioning from childhood would be particular. It may be very, very difficult for you as a parent to absorb all these issues. How do we sort of agree to disagree?
I think that ultimately, even if you have a difference of opinion, you let that child know that you love them no matter what. You have loved them since they were the day they were born. This new information about them or this new perspective that they have does not change how much you love them and how much you value them. And so, yes, we may have differing opinions. I maybe, I maybe have a more traditional perspective on that. You maybe have more traditional perspective on that. But ultimately, the love that I have for you and the pride I have in you and the beauty you are in this world, none of that has changed.
And I want to just end this conversation, just knowing your thoughts about what made you, write your series. Can you tell us a little bit about your play? Because I think I mean, that's fantastic because I saw some clippings on your website and on YouTube. So can you give us some interesting information? Do you have any books around, like you showed us your game? Do you have any books around there that you can show?
Oh, yes. I have a bunch of comics. I have an omnibus of comics. So it's a collection of 12 comics related to disabilities and 6 comics related to mental health disorders. I don't have my omnibuses with me right now, but I can show you a bunch of comics that are close by here. They have been translated into different languages. So there's some that are in Spanish, but I have a whole bunch. So that started off as individual comics, and then it became a full omnibus. But in order to answer your question about kind of the premise behind it, what got me started, I have 2 nephews on the autism spectrum. And I went to Cornell undergrad, but I actually graduated a year early. And that year I worked at Columbia and at Nickelodeon, the Children's Programming
Yep.
Network.
Yep.
And I lived with one of my nephews who had just been diagnosed on the spectrum. And I said to my sister, what is the hardest part of autism for you? What is the most difficult part? And she said, yes, it's very expensive, all the therapies, everything that we have to do. That's tough. But the hardest part is that kids flock to my other children and they pretend that my son is part of the wallpaper. They don't take the time to interact with him, to know his passions, his interests, what makes him special. And she said, that is the hardest thing. And so I thought to myself, with the work I was doing at Nickelodeon and the socio-emotional learning I was doing at Columbia, I thought, how can I create a children's television program or forms of media, right, that can really increase typically developing kids' ideas about autism and other disabilities? How can we enhance their perspectives, enhance their sensitivity and the empathy, et cetera, towards kids with disabilities, and make them more interested in interacting with them and make them more interested in flocking to my nephew and to other kids with disabilities? So that's really how it started. And then I had I had this premise for the TV show. I brought it to a whole bunch of schools. They said, we're schools, we'd love to see it in book format. So I created the 12 comic book disability series. And then people said, we love the disabilities, we'd love to see it in mental health disorders. So I did the mental health disorders as well. And then they said to me, did you give up on the show idea? And so I had $5,000 left in my research account. And I built 5 puppets with that money. And within a year and a half, it was off Broadway for 2 years in Manhattan. And now, as I said, it was optioned for TV. So we're working on that and possibly for film. So again, for me, it's not about, the money. There hasn't been much, it's not a money thing for me. It's if I can get this message out and if I can get this appreciation out for kids with disabilities who often have to struggle more than the average person, right? But yet are still able to live in this world and do it with such grace. I want to share that with as many people as possible. I want as many people to understand that these are really unique, special individuals, and we need to give them our time and commitment and recognize their beautiful value.
What I'm loving about it is, there are so many fun ways to sort of connect with your child, to, sort of just help him to express his emotions, to get him to be compassionate, to get him to be kind. You are devising so many tools for us to use.
Mm.
do you have any last words, for parents? Because I think, rather than sitting and having these deep conversations and serious arguments and having these conflicts, I think just having fun, expressing even sadness in a very pictorial way or a visual way, I mean, that would do it all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, the reason that I created, comics, I know kids love graphic novels. I know kids love games. I know kids love to watch, TV. So I've used all of those mediums to try to teach things that I think are really important for kids' development. And so parents, read to your children, sit with them, co-view with them when they watch something, buy games, buy comics, buy books and autobiographies, help them understand different people in this world and how they live a little bit differently. And your kids will get so much just from those really appealing edutainment kinds of opportunities, not just watching a lecture, but really use the materials that they're interested in anyway and teach them in those organic ways, and you'll be in good shape.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you so much once again for joining us, giving us so much knowledge and tools for our parents as well as kids.
Thank you so much.